Now, from the Signature Bank Studios. This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Just a postscript on Mike Klotz, since we had a bit of a heated exchange there at the end of last hour.
I'm glad he called in, though.
Yeah, so am I. That's why
Our
we took
boring show.
Yeah, I know. It's just, but that's the problem. You know, it's exactly what I said. Exactly what I could read from this very good Free Press article. I could get right inside his head in terms of where this guy is, and then he proved it. As I said, mugged by reality, but he's got a long way to go, or they do as a family. Listen to his words, which apparently some of which he is now wants to take back. I don't know. He seemed to be bothered that he was quoted as saying the progressive politics has gone cuckoo. But anyway, it's fine. He's not an identitarian. We agree on that. Happy to join forces with allies of convenience, recognizing that that's all it is, because he's not going anywhere. He just sees this as sort of a bug within his party and politics rather than a feature, which it actually is. He doesn't understand that he's a member of a revolutionary party at present. You know, he has there's a potential he could do so much against the witch burners that he decries, but listen to this additional piece of the story before we get to Jim Perry and talk tariffs and economics. It's unfortunate what's happened to his son, and he casts himself. I'm the villain in the story because I made fun of their Ruth Bader Ginsburg bobblehead dollar. I didn't even mention that they have a dog with a pink mohawk. So, it's fine. Whatever.
They have a dog with a pink mohawk?
Yeah, that's I learned from the story. But anyway, it's fine. Be hippies, whatever. I don't care. And I can't make fun of you. Like, you want to you come in and you take the Trump shots and stuff. Like, that's, that's all they have. Talk about boring. Oh, Trump people are getting what they want, and you like it when people are critical of Trump supporters and stuff. You can be critical of whatever you want. Name calling is part of politics. Big deal.
Just wanted to know how
the substance of what happened here is the big deal.
Right.
But he can't get beyond it. He can't get beyond his politics. Their son, now a freshman at the local high school, still grappling with the aftermath of what happened to him. He had straight A's in Evanston, very smart. He's struggling to get through school. I don't know if he'll graduate high school, says mom.
That's
terrible.
Sad.
The family spent around $10,000 on private tutoring to help him focus on his studies. But she says he's never going to trust adults in education, and I don't blame him one bit. He cannot go into a public school building and have any trust in any adult. It ruined his educational career. Mike Klotz said there's no one that's paid any consequences for this whatsoever. And I'll be honest with you, I want my pound of flesh. Without the truth getting out there, we can't move on. Yeah, it's funny. You know how the truth got out there? Because center-right publication like the Free Press took up his story because a conservative talk show is talking about it. How are all of his friends in leftist media aiding the story, making sure the truth gets out there? I wonder. I didn't hear anything about this. I remember the news story from a couple of years ago because of the hysteria that corporate media always brings to these racial, anything that could possibly be racially charged, that they could demagogue.
The headline, it was another noose found in the Chicago area, this
right.
time at an Evanston Junior High School.
Yes, right. The scourge of white supremacy in Evanston and Skokie. Yeah, right. Okay. But instead he wants to be a smartass. Okay, fine. I mean, stuff is important to me, but if you can't, if it's only sort of transactional and self-interested, we're all supposed to, this is the same thing I talked about the Republican Party, which I'm happy to be critical of, unlike Mike, at least not when he's on the radio, even though he was in print. you don't take up the fights you should take up for other people when the call is made. And then you expect people to rally around you when it's time to fight for you. That doesn't work. What they did to his kid, and they just moved to Lincolnwood. I mean, I agree with getting him out of that school district. What about rallying all of these people that Mike and others suggest are, I'm a liberal, but I'm like a Woodstock liberal. I'm not in this identity stuff. Okay, well, what about rallying all those people that you suggest are the real party of the left? What effort was made? Get in front of the cameras. Go to a school board meeting. Take on all comers. You want to have a public fight? Let's have a public fight. Where's that? So I'm sorry this happened to him. And most importantly, his son. This is why we're talking about it. And I could give a rat's ass what he thinks about me or this show. The problem is that the real lesson hasn't been internalized. A real appreciation for the size and scope of the threat is not present. That's the problem. So if Mike's still listening, call me all the names you want. Give me the hi-hats. I'm not as smart as you think you are. Okay, Mike.
I feel sick for his son. That's awful.
Continue the approach that you've taken until now, 3 years later, of getting beaten up in a back alley by these witch burners. And let me know how that goes. I'm sure your son is internalizing that, too. It's not just adults in education. As I said, how anybody lets the mob come for their sixth grader. Okay. Pick it up in Open Mic Friday. Now we turn our attention to the fallout from the Trump tariffs. Trump saying the rollout is going well. It's the adjustment period, but expect big things.
I think it's going very well. It was an operation like when a patient gets operated on, and it's a big thing. I said this would exactly be the way it is. We have $6 or $7 trillion coming into our country, and we've never seen anything like it. The markets are going to boom, the stock is going to boom, the country is going to boom, and the rest of the world wants to see, is there any way they can make a deal? They've taken advantage of us for many, many years. For many years, we've been at the wrong side of the ball, and I'll tell you what, I think it's going to be unbelievable. The thing that people have to talk about, we're up almost to $7 trillion of investment coming into our country, and you'll see how it's going to turn out. Our country's going to boom.
For more on this, pleased to be joined by our friend Jim Perry, founder, CIO of Perry International Capital Partners. James, thanks for joining us, as always. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan. Good morning. Good morning, Amy.
Your general handle on the Liberation Day rollout and the impact and the near term.
Right. Well, Liberation Day and the tariff rollout certainly is a bigger story today than the employment report, which tends to dominate the first Friday of the month news.
Yeah.
The trade war story is causing tremendous anxiety amongst international investors, a little bit less so here. A big part of my business is international. So I have a lot of clients in Europe and Canada, and they are all furious. And I think the reason for it is that, they know they're going to get hit and their economies are going to slow down. So I understand the angst. I think trying to explain what Trump is doing can be boiled down to one simple thing, and that is that, all of this noise about increased prices for consumers, it's really yet to materialize at this moment. Now, maybe it starts today or in 3 days or next week, but prices aren't going up in the country yet. But, in the stock market, to be honest with you, is down 10% from the highs. But, the Dow is down 4%, 5% this year, right? And it's still up 6% from a year ago's low. So I think it's very easy to get wound up and get angry and confused and uncertain and feeling bearish. But at the end of the day, the tariff story is really about the biggest story in this country, which is reducing deficit spending, reducing trade deficits, and reducing the national debt. And whether that happens this week or this quarter, probably not. But in 6 months, end of the year, I think you're going to start seeing some effects on that. And I have a feeling this uncertainty is going to be with us for a while because emotions are running very high.
The jobs number, 228,000 jobs reportedly created in March. Is that meaningful in any direction?
Well, it's a mushy number, as you and I have talked about many times. But, I was thinking it was going to be 250,000, 200,000 new jobs, and it was. It's 228. The interesting thing about the data this morning is federal government jobs apparently are only down by 4,000 jobs, right? Retail's up 23,000, healthcare's up 77. So one of the reasons I'm not too terribly bearish on the economy is that, the labor market is growing, right? I mean, that's what these numbers say, and the trend is quite clear. The labor market in this country, Dan, has never been higher. It's 170 million official workers in this country. Government says it's 159, but everybody else says it's 170 or 175. So if this economy is dependent on the consumer spending, and consumers do spend on average 100% of their income, the economy is going to probably grow at 2.5 or 3% this year. Maybe it's a quarter of that this quarter, but I think the economy is probably going to do okay because government spending is going to go down.
The dollar, the weakening dollar, do you see this as either purposeful or problematic or both?
The dollar took a big hit yesterday. It's at 102. What's interesting is that it's actually up against the euro this morning. And I think that if you really look at it in the grand scheme of things, J.P. Morgan has an index of essentially non-G10 currencies, sort of the emerging markets of the world. And that currency index is down about 20%, 23%, in fact, over the last sort of 5 years. So the dollar really is quite strong. And the idea that investors are going to sell the dollar and buy the currency that matters most, which is the euro, which is 57% of the dollar bucket. In a short-term basis, sure, it can go down a little bit. But, longer term, the growth in this country and the dynamic nature of this economy, not to mention sort of rule of law, free speech, and the strong geopolitical presence, the dollar is still going to do very well here. Short term, maybe not, but longer term, there's still money coming into this country.
Now, I thought Trump's tariffs were being used as a bargaining chip, and so far Vietnam and India have shown some movement. But China this morning is 34% reciprocal tariff on U.S. goods. How is that going to affect us?
Yeah.
Because we get most of our stuff from China if people check their labels.
Right. The optimistic view on reciprocal trade has always been, don't worry, the tariffs are never going to come into effect. China can't afford to get into a trade war with the United States, nor can Canada, nor can Mexico. That's kind of been thrown for a loop here this morning. So I think that's one of the reasons, the market was down so hard yesterday because everybody knew it was coming, and it's probably going to come down a little bit more today. I think as an optimist about this country, I would like to think that there will be more negotiations and some of these tariffs will go down. But it sure doesn't look like it today. What I would say, Amy, 90% of the trade deficit that this country is run against 10 countries, right? So some of these tariffs against smaller nations and Pacific Island countries and things like that, that's kind of silly, and that probably will go away. But, $300 billion to China, $200 billion against the European Union, $175 billion against Mexico, and $125 billion against Vietnam. Those are the top four. Those numbers are going to come down. And I think that even with China reciprocating by 34%, they're not going to be able to afford to do that for very long. But I think, you get $500 billion reduced from the trade deficit in 12 months. That $500 billion goes straight to U.S. GDP, right? So I think they're going to do it, and I think there's going to be a little bit of pain here. But I think the bond market is telling you that inflation's coming down. The dollar's telling you that money's still coming in. In the stock market, everybody's nervous about that because you see it all the time. But remember that, the stock market, the S&P 500, is still up 75% from the 2022 lows when the government started stimulating. And we're down 10% now. You think people are really going to liquidate their stocks when they are up so much in the last 2.5 years? And quite honestly, well, go ahead, Dan. Sorry.
So, would you be suggesting that people think about buying the dip?
I do. I don't know where that dip's going to bottom out, but on your show last month, I thought it would be very, very logical and very normal and very healthy for the S&P to retrace to a pretty much standard emotional retracement, which is that sort of famous Fibonacci number at 38.2, which gets you down to about 5,500 or 5,200, 5,100, right? So 51, 52. I'm going to put some money in if we get that low.
The market outlook that you led this week with, which we played earlier in the week, talking about your optimism and thinking about Q3 and Q4 being where you'll start to see some bounce back. Is that predicated? That view, that optimism about the sort of GDP growth you were mentioning, that we're not going to see a recession, market will begin to rebound. Is that predicated on deals getting done, some of those tariffs, including with our major trading partners, being reduced considerably, or do you think that it's regardless even if these tariffs stay substantially in place for the next 12 months?
Right. It's a couple of things, and that's a really good question, and it needs to be kind of articulated. I'll start with this. If global trade was its own country, it would be the largest economy in the world, right? So global trade is $33 trillion a year, right? U.S. economy is $30 trillion. Now, the World Trade Organization came out, saw this article in Reuters yesterday. The World Trade Organization estimates that global trade is going to go down 1% this year. All right? It's not going to go down 10% or 20%. It's going to go down 1%. Like life on the planet, economies find a way to live, right? They find a way to adapt and to live. And I think, this famous sort of Chauncey Gardner thing about, there'll be growth in the spring. The Japanese blossoms are coming out in Washington. And I really do think that people do tend to get a little bit wound up about how bad things feel. And a lot of that's market narrative. And, I don't want to get into that too much. But the bottom line is I think that the U.S. economy remains very dynamic. And I think if you can cut government spending by $500 billion, which should be easy, and the trade deficit by $500 billion, that's $1 trillion that goes from non-productive government spending into the economy. And there's no other country or area of the world that can do that. And I think that good investors, long-term investors, generational wealth type investors are looking at this thing and saying, great, get all those longs out of the market because, the S&P is still really expensive. I mean, the price multiple, the valuation is 22 times earnings. The value in Europe is 15 times, and Japan is 15 times, and in China is 6, right? So the U.S. economy and the U.S. stock markets are still reflecting growth and dynamism, but the emotions behind everything right now are so negative that good investors, like guys like Warren Buffett, he's got 28% of his portfolio in cash. He's just waiting for stuff to get a little bit cheaper. So, yeah, I think, at some point here in 3 months or 6 months, the market's going to turn around because they're going to say, hey, the numbers and the data look pretty good. And these stocks are the cheapest they've been for 2 or 3 years. So
what about
optimistic? I just don't feel it today.
Yeah, understood. Same question predicated on tax cuts being extended with the additions that Trump promised. Is what you're suggesting 3, 6, 9 months down the road also predicated on the tax cuts getting done?
I think the tax cuts were a big part of the platform and sort of the campaign of Trump. I think the hard, cold reality of a drop in revenues coming from trade and whatnot in the short term, kind of, if you listen to Scott Bessent and some of these guys, they're kind of floating around the idea of maybe not cutting taxes so much. And I think that's part of the reason the stock market's not feeling so good. So it's a very dynamic situation right now. I don't believe anything that we see today or this week or even last week is really going to reflect reality when the dust settles. I think deregulation and lower taxes can occur, and deregulation is happening now. But I think the bigger issue is let's cut that trade deficit, let's cut that spending budget deficit.
James Perry, founder, CIO of Perry International Capital Partners. Jim, thanks as always.
Dan, thanks a lot. Have a good weekend. Thanks, Amy.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is the morning show more Chicago radio listeners are choosing. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
At almostfreeteeth.com, they're dedicated to making smiles great again.